be known. And the vision was to be set aside for a period of time because it had to deal mainly with things that are going to be happening in the latter days. So let's begin with Daniel chapter 8, and first of all with the vision of the ram and the goat. In verses 1 through 14, there's a few pre-vision facts that I think that are good for us to note. It begins with Daniel 8, verses 1 through 2. In the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, and what kingdom was Belshazzar in? Babylon. In the line of Babylonian kings, where does he stand? The last king. He's the one which had the great feast. Yeah, and there was a handwriting. He saw the handwriting on the wall, but wasn't quite sure what it meant. I wish I had always been able. Well, I've seen the handwriting on the wall before, but missed its meaning and paid the price, just like Belshazzar did. So it's good to pay attention. If you don't know, my dad always said, ask somebody. And Daniel was good at that. You don't know, ask somebody. Nebuchadnezzar asked somebody, he asked Daniel. Belshazzar asked somebody, he asked Daniel, and so on and so forth. And then when Daniel has a question, who does he ask? He asks God. And that's something good for us to remember. In verse 2 it says, I looked in the vision, and while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam. And I looked in the vision, and I myself was beside the Ulai Canal. So here's what we learn from these two verses. First of all, that it was in the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, 538 BC, I think. And the recipient of this vision was not any of the kings, but it was Daniel himself. And the location, well, Daniel was probably in Babylon, but in the vision, he saw himself placed in the citadel of Susa, within the land of Elam, beside the Ulai Canal. A lot of prepositional phrases here, isn't there? And so Daniel probably did not physically change his position, but in his vision, he was directed towards towards Susa and things that would begin to take place out of that area.
It's interesting that Daniel was projected into the Persian Empire.
Yeah. And so if you need to see where that is relative to everything, you'll see Babylon in the kind of the upper left portion of this map. And Susa is just to the right of it. And the dashed arrow represents the distance of about 250 miles or so. So about as far as from here to St. Louis. That's how far they had to go to get to from Babylon to Susa. And without the interstate. Of course, with the I-70 in the state that it's been, you probably would have rather walked. Like well, never mind. The Bible mentions 3 people in relation to Susa, so it's not the first time that, well, actually, it is the first time that we're seeing Susa relative to anything significant.
Esther and Nehemiah would have put her before Daniel.
That's right. In fact, my dates show that. Well, no. Look at this. Daniel had a vision about the coming invasions by Persia and Greece at Susa. This was 539 BC. And then later, Esther was elevated to the queen of Persia at Susa in the days of Ahasuerus.
But if you read the Bible from front to back,
Okay, thanks for the confusion, I need that. At my age, I don't need that, but I understand where you're coming from. You were afraid at that time too.
What time?
Times of the Gentiles,
Oh,
actually the time of old age. We're about, I think we're the same age, aren't we, Randy?
yeah. I think you might be older than me. Not by much.
I just act old, more mature.
I won't get into that.
We won't take a vote, either one, of what people think, so. And then Nehemiah served as cupbearer to Artaxerxes the first when he received the news about the walls of Jerusalem. That's Susa in Nehemiah 1:1 in 445 BC. So I think it's kind of interesting to, in the Bible, when you're doing your study, to take a look at these places. And if you've got a concordance or something like that, run them through the concordance and then look at where they appear and what significantly happened in those places. If I were to ever take a trip to Israel, I think that I would probably take a handbook of such things, because it'd be interesting. Because I don't think you don't follow biblical history on a tour like that. You just show up at places and you discuss, well, this happened here, this happened there, and they'll be out of order for you. But I've always enjoyed geography and things like that. Now we have the appearance and the description of the ram. What you see here is a map that represents the confrontation between these two kings of what we'll be talking about, the goat and the ram. And so the first one we're talking about is to the east, we see that the goat deals mainly with Greece and Turkey and that, whereas the ram you'll find more dealing with what is now Iraq, Iran, and Syria and places like that. And there's these two areas are still somewhat separated in some of their basic peoples and even religious ideas. Although the whole area is becoming Muslim, pretty much. Turkey was not always as Muslim as it is, but it's almost totally Muslim now. And so I think that Pastor Jerry's thoughts in his study from the book of the Revelation might be quite correct, that we're not going to be dealing so much with the nations around the old Roman Empire as much as we're going to be dealing with Islam, which could very well take over even the area that is Europe. Already the migrations have taken place and they're filling the earth, and I think it's a purposeful thing. Even in our country, when you look at the southern border, notice how many Islamic peoples are beginning to come in from that area. And it's hard to discern whether they're escaping something or whether they're coming to become a part of the problem here in our country. So let's look at the appearance of the description of the ram. Somebody read verses 3 and 4.
Then I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had 2 horns was standing in front of the canal. Now the 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, with the longer one coming up last. I saw the ram butting westward, northward, and southward, and no other beast could stand before him, nor was there anyone to rescue from his power, but he did as he pleased and magnified himself.
Okay. Um, oh, I thought I had shown you that map already. Okay. But those are the two areas of the ram, which will be facing off here pretty soon. But here are some of the things that we notice about what we just read. The ram had how many horns?
Two long ones.
Two.
Two horns. Was there any difference between these two
One
horns?
was longer.
Okay. And which one of them appeared last?
The longer one.
Okay. Where did the ram go?
East, north, and south. West, north, and south.
Three directions he took off. And what kind of power did he have?
He was undefeatable and without equal.
And what was his basic attitude? He was sovereignly willful. Now, there's a difference between being willful and being sovereignly willful.
He felt that he was the goat.
Yeah, the ram thought he was a goat, and he's about to discover that that is not true. The greatest of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like to make the difference between sovereignly willful and not sovereignly willful. You know, what age do you think a child is most willful? Those of you who've had children.
2 and 3.
2 and 3? Okay, I wouldn't know.
So they call it the terrible twos.
Yeah. The terrible twos and the thrilling threes. That's what
Sometimes as teenagers.
I think. That's what
13 comes to
Dr.
mind.
Gladden called them. Anyway,
13 comes to mind as well.
13. Now that was my specialty. 13 middle schoolers are my specialty. They're fun because they think they're so smart.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to prove that they're not. Anyway, now a sovereignly willful means he's the top guy. There's no one above him. And the problem with the ram here, he thought, he was it in the world.
So there was no one to tell him he wasn't right.
But he missed. Evidently, there was someone who was more sovereign than he. And would that have been? God was more sovereign than he. See, this is what all of these kings failed to see. And think of the kings that learned differently, which was why some of them went through what they went through in the book of Daniel, so that they could be brought down, not so well in Nebuchadnezzar's place. He was not brought down just a notch. He was brought down to the grass, So notice the areas in which the ram went from his place: west, north to Lydia, and south towards Egypt. And so it was kind of a horizontal movement in his campaign to expand his empire. But now we have the appearance of the GOAT. Not Tom Brady, not Patrick Mahomes, and none of those guys.
We're going to start that. I'm going to ask if the ram was in Los Angeles or St. Louis.
Yeah,
Kurt Warner.
Yeah, Kurt Warner. Yeah, Los Angeles Rams. Don't get me started. We have the appearance of and the description of the goat. Somebody read verse 5 from the screen if you must.
While I was observing, behold, a male goat was coming from the west over the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had
Conspicuous.
horn between his eyes.
Yeah. You know, some translations, instead of male, they call him a shaggy goat. Sounds like a Disney movie. The shaggy goat. It was a shaggy dog, wasn't it? What? What?
That was not.
The shaggy goat. Okay, this is what we observe from.
Thank God for barbers.
I wish, I wish I could hear, because I think I would have been entertained as well. Here's some facts that we gather from this verse. He came from the west. He's the wicked ruler from the west. There's a lot of movie things in this passage, isn't there? The wicked ruler of the west, and he conquered without touching the ground.
He's flat moving on.
Huh?
He's flat moving on.
Yeah. He was. That's fast, you know. And then he had says a conspicuous horn between its eyes, and conspicuous. It's
Means you're not gonna miss it.
yeah. It means that it's noticeable among. It's dominant is actually the idea here. It's a dominant horn. I think if I had to have horns, I'd like for them to match at least, but to have one like this and one like that would look kind of weird. But that's what the goat was. And what we notice next is that the annihilation and the destruction of the ram by the goat. Verses 6 and 7 of Daniel chapter 8. Someone.
He came up to the ram that had the two horns, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and arrested him in his mighty wrath. I saw him come beside the ram, and he was enraged at him. And he struck the ram and shattered his two horns, and the ram had no strength to withstand him. So we hurled him to the ground and trampled on him, and there was no one to rescue the ram from his power.
Okay. So I bet you that was a surprise. That happened to the Chiefs a couple of times this year. You know, they're totally surprised by what teams that should not have beat them did, and so I don't think that the Ram was expecting that.
It was a different animal. Different animals.
They're different animals, and there are different strengths. Which one do you think had the most in its army?
Yeah, are we talking lions and horses here, or are we talking?
No, we're talking about men,
goat.
the men in the armies that came against each other. Which one had the largest army?
Actually, it was probably Persia. Had
You're
the
right.
largest army.
Had the largest army, but their estimates, and I don't know whether I put this in my notes later or not. If I did, we'll just pass over it. But it's estimated that Alexander the Great had maybe at any one time, depending on the battle, might have 50,000 present, up to maybe 75,000. But the Persians have been said to have had almost from 800,000 to almost 1 million or so. And they lost. And the reason for that being was that Alexander was so quick. You remember Shock and Awe
Mm-hmm.
from the 90s? That's what they learned from that. Arnold Schwarzenegger was like, I really liked listening to that guy.
General.
I get on the updates. Because it sounded like
Schwarzkopf.
Schwarzkopf. What did I say?
You're thinking of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Bach?
I meant Schwarzkopf.
Yeah.
I loved listening to that guy, and because he sounded like he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why that was over so quickly, because he was traveling over the ground, so his feet weren't touching the ground anyway. And I think we're having some issues because there are people who don't remember that as a tactic today. And we're going to end up hurting more people than saving. And I know that's getting to be political, so I'll leave that alone. So here they are, the goat coming from the west to the east to take care of the ram with the one dominant horn. So what we learn is that the goat was the wrathful aggressor. And that is, when he came in, he spared nothing and no one. And the goat destroys the ram and its two horns, the lesser kingdom of Media and the dominant kingdom of Persia. They by this time had merged together, and Media had been reduced to basically being a mercenary army for Persia. Which some say contributed to its downfall because it didn't have the same loyalty towards Persia. It wasn't quite as enthused about Persia running things as Persia thought they might be. You had to pay them to fight, you know. So he destroys the ram and the kingdoms of Media, Persia. And so we see the annihilation of the large horn and the division of his empire. Now we'll identify all these in a little bit because the passage itself will identify them. Daniel 8:8.
And the male goat magnified himself exceedingly, but as soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken, and its place there came up four conspicuous horns toward the four winds of heaven.
Okay. Here we go again. How many times do we see this phrase, magnified himself? Pride is probably one of the worst sins that a person can commit relative to God. And we do that sometimes in very subtle ways. By not consulting him, by ignoring him, putting him on a shelf, not studying, his word, knowing his will, because we think we have it all figured out. And we don't, by any stretch of the imagination. People, I think, are unduly concerned. That would not be so if they just knew the scriptures, especially in these days and in which we find ourselves living. Because the one thing that God keeps doing over and over and over again, and we seem to keep missing the lesson, is I know what's going on. And it's going somewhere. It's going to end up where I want it to end. And I'm going to win. And those of you who follow me are going to win with me. If we understood that God is never out of control of anything, whether it be world empires or the things that are happening in your life, He's there. He's there. Does that mean He's going to deliver you from all of the pain that you might experience? No, sometimes the pain is there because we caused it in the first place. Or sometimes it's there for the purpose of showing His grace to you and His sufficiency. And sometimes so you might be an example to those who are outside the faith what God can do, and even those inside the faith, what He can do. So, don't think that to follow God means that everything is going to be without challenges, without pain, without suffering. There are Palestinian Christians that are going through some very terrible times right now, and so I hope you're praying for them as well as you are for Israel, because the Christians are our brothers and sisters as well. And who knows what's going on with them. So pray for them as well. So we have this male goat who magnifies himself. And the end result is that he is broken, and not just broken. He's pulverized. I mean, he's scattered to the four winds.
He dies real suddenly.
He does. He was 33 when he died, and some say it was from a fever, but he had some other physical issues too that came as a result of the lifestyle that he lived. He was king, and he had his choice of whatever he wanted to do, and he turned towards oftentimes towards the fleshly lusts, and as a result of that paid the price. Who knows what he would have been able to accomplish if he had been left on the scene for longer than that.
He was invading India.
Hmm?
He was invading India at the time.
Yeah, he got a very small portion of the west part of India and a part of what is now Pakistan, and all the way that's on the west or the eastern edge, and to the east it would have been just to the east of Greece, Macedonia, and to the south all the way down to the southern reaches and maybe a little bit further than Egypt, and a lot of North Africa in Libya. When he was 33.
Now, who are you talking about?
Talking about Alexander the Great,
Okay.
who destroyed the ram, Medo-Persia, and Napoleon tried to duplicate that. And of course, he met his Waterloo. Okay. This is a map of the four areas that were the result after about 20 some years of battle among Alexander's generals, four major generals. This is how his kingdom was divided up in up into the east, to the west. Cassander took over a lot of what was Greece. Lucicamus, mainly Turkey, and Syria, and Assyria, Persia, the Seleucids, Seleucus, and then Ptolemy in Egypt. Now, for the most part, Ptolemy had control over Palestine, and that was going to change. So let's look at this for a little bit. We say we've seen the, whoops, nope. Okay, we've seen the goat's self-aggrandizement. I know, and this is my word for the week, so I had to use it a few times. You ever have words of the week that you would try to build your vocabulary? Well, anyway, it swells exceedingly. And the goat's large horn was broken at 323. He became king when he was like 20 years old or so. And so he ruled for 13, did all of this within a 13-year period.
Which included getting, because he was made king of Macedonia.
Right.
Was it all of Greece?
Philip was his dad.
Which
Philip
was
II was his dad, the king of Macedonia.
So it wasn't all of Greece. He had to conquer all of Greece before he started the rest of it. So,
Yeah, well, that was his already by birthright, yeah.
yeah,
And then, so we noticed that the large horn was divided into 4 horns. And after, it says, 40 years of war, stuck in my mind it was more like 20. I'll have to check my source on that. Do you remember, Pastor?
No.
Okay.
seems like 40 anyway. Huh?
It probably felt like 40. It probably was. Well, anyway, and the 4 main kingdoms emerged, which we talked about: the Ptolemies, Seleucid Empire, and Lysimachus, and then the empire that was made up in Macedonia and Greece. Now here comes the part you've all been waiting for. I don't know, have you been waiting for this part? Do you know what part's next?
The next part.
The next part?
The next part.
Okay, this is what we're looking at next. The rise and reign of the little horn.
Not the horn?
Not
Not the horn?
not the horn. This is the horn. They're 2 different things.
We're not talking about the little big one here.
Yeah.
This is Antiochus IV Epiphanes. The Epiphanes is an indication of deity. What's interesting is that he became to be so hated by even people that he was ruled by. They called him Epimanes. Epimanes means madman. And that was just a play on words, even in
We
Greek.
covered this 2 years ago in our Christmas program.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. So Daniel chapter 8, verses 9 through 12. Somebody want to read that?
Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. It grew up to the host of heaven. It caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. It even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host, and it removed the regular sacrifice from him, and the place of his sanctuary where it was thrown down. And on account of transgression, the host will be given over to the horn along with the regular sacrifice, and it will cling true to the ground and perform its will and prosper.
Okay. Now, this is not to be confused with the last Antichrist. But Antiochus is here to basically be the illustration of the one to come. He's the little horn that ruled at the close of the Greek Empire, or the beginning of its decline. And so we notice that he falls, the small horn emerges from one of the 4 horns of the goat. And he came from the Seleucid Empire, or Seleucid. The pronunciations are divided on that. And his invasions extended southward to Egypt, which was unsuccessful. Didn't quite get there. Then eastward, and then he comes down to the beautiful land. And their historians believe that he had this real hatred for the Jews because of his lack of success in Egypt. And of course, remember that Egypt controlled Palestine. And so when he came in there and conquered them, he didn't get Egypt, but he did get Palestine. And he took it out, his wrath out upon God's people there in Palestine. So here we see his flow. He went east, conquered, went south, got there, but they were able to repel him, and then back up to Jerusalem, and that's where he laid siege to that city and took control. Now, it says that the small horn reached for and trampled on some of the stars. Now, you might think of stars maybe as being angels, but what we're talking about is wrath against God's people. And there are a couple of places where the stars is a clear indication of God, of being God's people in other places. Genesis 15:5 and 6 speaks that about God taking Abraham outside and said, "Now look toward the heavens and count the stars. If you're able to count them, if you are able to count them." And he said to him, "So shall your descendants be." Then he believed in the Lord, and he reckoned it to him as righteousness. And then in Genesis 22, verse 17, "Indeed, I will greatly bless you and will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies." So Antiochus was not the kind of man who had the ability to go up into the heavens and fight the angels. But he could wreak havoc upon God's people. You know, when Joseph had his dream, the dreaming included his 11 other brothers who were pictured as being what? Stars? Stars circling him. And those stars became basically those from which Israel came as a nation. So there's plenty of reason to believe that he's talking about God's people when he's talking about these particular stars. So here comes his favorite phrase again, well, not so favorite. The small horn made this mistake. He magnified himself against the commander of the host, the commander of the stars, who is God. And he did it by doing these 5 things. Removing the regular daily sacrifices.
Desecrating the temple.
Desecrating the temple. Trampling, slaughtering the host, Jews. Casting truth aside, that is the true worship of God, and replacing it with his personal idolatrous religion. And he did all of this unopposed. Unopposed. Who could oppose him? So, we're going to see this again. Well, maybe we won't. Hopefully, we won't. Hopefully, the church will be raptured, and this will take place in the middle of the tribulation period.
Maybe we'll observe from afar.
Maybe we will observe from afar. So again, this is God preparing the way, giving Daniel insight as to even more information than the kings received, or even that Israel was told at the time. But that was because Daniel was so faithful. And you know, when you get the kind of revelations that Daniel was being given, I suppose to have all that information and very little of its meaning would have drove you near crazy. And it seemed like God was taking notice and mercifully saying, Daniel, I'm going to let you in on some privileged information here.
Daniel was the only significant character in all of the scripture other than Christ that scripture never points out any fault.
Right. Daniel was one of the righteous, which you cannot, where he is never criticized for any sin. And Joseph. So how long will this last, do you think? I know. The duration and the defilement of the temple. He's going to defile the temple. Daniel 8, verses 13 and 14. Anybody?
Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the particular one who was speaking, how long will the vision about the regular sacrifice apply, while the transgression causes horror, so as to allow both the holy place and the host to be trampled? He said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the holy place will be properly restored.
Okay, so we got some information here about the duration of this. Well, let's look at that a little bit. The 2,300 days would have as its ending point the restoration and rededication of the temple, which occurred on December 25th, 165 BC, which is, what festival do the Jews celebrate at that time? Hanukkah. December 25th. Okay, and that was under Judas Maccabeus. Now, the Maccabees, the books of Maccabees are included in the Apocrypha, I think. But they have worth. They have worth as historical reading, but they don't have the status of inspired writings. So we get this information from the Maccabees. Then the only way you can discover when the beginning of this might have taken place is to count backwards from December the 25th, utilizing a prophetic calendar. And it takes you back to September the 6th, 171 BC, but it's not tied to a particular event, although there may have been a particular event on that day, but it's just not told to us. That was the beginning of the atrocities that came upon God's people, and they could have begun on that particular date. 2,300 days. Now, lots of people have tried to use these dates to represent something else. One of them I read had to do with using these dates as leading us to the year 2025. It's interesting how they do, because then they're not dealing with days, they're dealing with years. And there's a calculation that can be made. I didn't make it because I didn't put much stock into it. Like I said, I don't put much stock into it until it happens, I guess. It could happen in 2025.
Looking back on the
Yeah.
history,
Yeah,
it's pretty clear what it meant.
yeah. You have to deal with the text.
Yeah.
What's it referring to? That's just good hermeneutics. So Daniel, this is the second part of this chapter, the interpretation, and we'll have to move through this pretty quick. First of all, we're going to look at Daniel's need to know and God's gracious response. Daniel 8, verses 15 and 16. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it, and behold, standing before me was one who looked like a man, And I heard the voice of a man between the banks of Eli, and he called out and said, Gabriel, give this man an understanding of the vision. And then Gabriel approaches Daniel. So he came near to where I was standing, the angel that was speaking. When he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, Son of man, understand that the vision pertains to the time of the end. Now, while he was talking with me, I sank into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand upright. So why did he fall? Did he fall on his face?
Out of fear.
Yeah, you know, a lot of people, when they're approached with these kinds of things, I would be scared out of my skin as well. Then Gabriel informs Daniel that the vision pertained to the time of the end. So know that about it, Daniel. Then he fell asleep, face to the ground, and made to stand upright by the touch of Gabriel. And so here's Gabriel's interpretation of the vision subject. And this is where things get specific. This is where we find out we're talking about Medo-Persia, Greece. Daniel 8:19 through 22 says, he said, Behold, I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time of the end. The ram you saw with the two horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. The broken horn and the four horns that arose in its place represent four kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. What do we learn from this? First of all, it's about the final period of the indignation, the appointed time of the end. It's about the ram, Media and Persia. It's about the goat, it's Alexander the Great, and the kingdoms in which his empire is divided. And then it's about a little horn, which rises from one of the four horns, to be a great enemy of God and his people, the Jews. Gabriel's interpretation of the little horn, this becomes the horn's resume. I don't particularly care for his resume. I don't know what kind of a job you could get with a resume like this, but notice what it is. In the latter period of their rule, when the transgressors have run their course, a king will arise, insolent and skilled in intrigue. His power will be mighty, but not by his own power, and he will destroy to an extraordinary degree and prosper and perform his will. He will destroy mighty men and the holy people. And through his shrewdness, he will cause deceit to succeed by his influence. He will magnify himself in his heart. He will destroy many while they are at ease. He will even oppose the prince of princes, but he will be broken without human agency. The vision of the evenings and mornings, which has been told, is true. So here's his resume. He arises when the other rulers have run their course. He'll be insolent and shrewd in his schemes. He'll be influenced by dark spiritual forces, perhaps Satan. He will be extraordinarily destructive. He will accomplish whatever he wants. He will be undefeatable by his enemies. He will consider himself a god. In fact, he took upon himself the title Son of Zeus. He will win battles by ambush. He will oppose the true God. He will fall not by human hands, but with one fell swoop, one big swing by God alone. And this is the thing to always remember about all rulers. He has an expiration date. And Gabriel leaves this final instruction. Keep this vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. And Daniel was exhausted and sick for days. He says, then I got up again and carried on the king's business, but I was astounded at the vision, and there was no one to explain it. And you might say, well, it's just been explained to him. Well, not totally. There's still a lot of identities here to work out, and that's what he was left. But he was told what the end game was.
Well, and we're looking back on it with history as context.
Mhm.
It didn't happen. So he didn't have the history.
No, he
that
didn't have the
we
history
as
that we
context.
know more about it than what Daniel did.
That's right.
Yeah. But notice he still had questions, and you're going to have questions.
Questions are okay.
But keep studying, because one of the things that you've learned in your lifetime, things have happened to shed light upon things that have happened that have been fulfilled in prophecy since. Okay, no, there can't be any questions. There could be. Any questions? Pressing questions? Okay. Then we shall close this session. And Tom, would you lead us in prayer, please?
Sure. Father God, once again, we're grateful to have this time together, Lord, and just the lessons that can be learned from Daniel and other leaders that we may glean from this. We thank you for Sam's time and preparation, Lord, and we just ask your blessing on our time together in our worship service. And again, we give you all the glory. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Just a reminder, immediately following service today, we are just presenting for discussion the proposed budget for next year. So, and if you don't have a copy of that, I think there are some maybe on the vestibule counter.
Good Shepherd, up there on 54th Methodist Church.